They say grief comes in stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Mine didn't. Mine came in a single, crushing blow delivered by a man in a pinstripe suit, in an office that smelled of lemon polish and old paper. It was the day my son's will was read, and it was the day I learned that a mother's love, a lifetime of it, could be valued at less than a piece of cheap ceramic. My name is Margaret Croft. I am 68 years old, and for 35 of those years, I was David's mother. That was my proudest title, my most cherished role. David was my only child, the brilliant, warm sun my entire world orbited around. His father, my dear Robert, passed from a sudden heart attack when David was just starting college, leaving the two of us to navigate the world as a team. And we did. David, with his father's sharp mind and my stubborn heart, built an empire from the ground up. He was in software logistics, a field I never quite understood. But I understood success. I understood the pride that swelled in my chest seeing his name, Croft Innovations, on the side of a gleaming glass tower downtown. He bought the large stone house in the Green Hills neighborhood, the one with the sprawling English garden I had always dreamed of. "It's for us, Mum," he'd said, his arm around my shoulder. "You'll have the whole east wing. No more climbing stairs for you." He insisted. I had my own space, my own entrance, but we shared dinners, we shared holidays, we shared our lives. It was our home. Then came Amelia. Amelia Dubois was like a character from a movie, breathtakingly beautiful, with hair the colour of spun gold and eyes the shade of a summer sky. She was 20 years younger than David, a former art gallery curator with a pedigree that dripped from every syllable she spoke. David was utterly besotted. He saw a goddess. I saw something else. I saw the way her eyes would scan a room before she entered, cataloguing its value. I saw the fleeting, almost imperceptible flicker of annoyance when I'd tell a long story about David's childhood. I saw how she'd gently steer conversations away from the past, away from anything that didn't involve her and their glittering new future. I tried to warn him in my own gentle way. "She's lovely, sweetheart. But does she know about the time you tried to build a go-kart and ended up in Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning rose bushes?" He'd just laugh. "Mum, Amelia's different. She's sophisticated. We're building a new life." And I, not wanting to be the meddling mother-in-law from a bad sitcom, bit my tongue. I smiled at the wedding, a lavish affair that cost more than my first house. I watched her glide down the aisle, a vision in white, and a cold knot formed in my stomach. She wasn't just marrying my son, she was acquiring him. They were married for 3 years. 3 years of my feeling like a guest in my own home. My wing of the house became Margaret's suite. The dinners we used to share became formal occasions, often with Amelia's friends, people who discussed stock portfolios and summering in the Hamptons. David seemed happy, though. He was stretched thin, working harder than ever. But whenever he looked at her, his eyes held a kind of desperate adoration. I told myself that his happiness was all that mattered. The call came on a Tuesday, a rainy, miserable Tuesday, a multi-car pileup on the interstate. David had been on his way to the airport. They said it was instantaneous. They said he didn't suffer. Small comforts that felt like sandpaper on a raw wound. The world shattered. The funeral was a blur of black suits, sympathetic murmurs, and Amelia's performance of a lifetime as the grieving widow. She clutched a lace handkerchief, her sobs delicate and photogenic. I, on the other hand, was a mess. A raw, broken thing that couldn't be packaged for public consumption. My grief was ugly, primal. A week later, we were in the office of Mr. Abernathy, David's estate lawyer. The room was mahogany and leather, a tomb of wealth. Amelia sat opposite me, draped in black silk, dabbing her eyes. I just felt numb. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat, his voice a dry rustle. "We are here to read the last will and testament of David Robert Croft, dated 6 months ago. 6 months. That was new. The will I knew of, the one David and I had drawn up with his father's lawyer years ago, had been very different." He began to read. The legal jargon washed over me until a few phrases cut through the fog. "To my beloved wife, Amelia Dubois Croft, I bequeath the entirety of my estate." The room tilted. "Including all properties, real and personal. This includes the residence at 1420 Rosewood Lane?" My home. "And the full balance of my investment portfolios, savings, and controlling shares in Croft Innovations, valued at approximately $17 million. The number hung in the air, obscene and suffocating. $17 million. Amelia let out a soft, theatrical gasp, pressing her handkerchief to her lips. I couldn't breathe. My mind was screaming. No, David wouldn't. He promised. He promised I would always be taken care of. He would never, ever leave me homeless. Mr. Abernathy continued, his eyes avoiding mine. "And to my mother, Margaret Croft." My heart leaped with a sliver of desperate hope. A trust? A fund? Something? "I bequeath the ceramic bluebird from my childhood bedroom, which has always brought me luck." Silence. Not just a lack of sound, but a heavy, pressing void. The ceramic bluebird. A cheap $5 trinket he'd won at a county fair when he was 10. It was a gaudy thing, chipped on one wing, with poorly painted eyes. It had sat on his dresser for years, a silly reminder of a happy day. I looked at Amelia. For the first time, her mask slipped. A flash of pure, unadulterated triumph lit her eyes, before she quickly replaced it with a look of pitying sadness. "Oh, Margaret," she murmured, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea well, you know how sentimental he was." The condescension was a slap in the face. Mr. Abernathy slid a small, tissue-wrapped object across the polished table. The bluebird. My entire life. The sacrifices I'd made. The love I'd poured into my son, summed up in a piece of worthless ceramic. The weeks that followed were a special kind of hell. Amelia gave me 30 days to vacate the premises. 30 days to pack up a lifetime of memories from the home my son had built for me. Her friends would walk through the house with her, pointing at furniture. "Oh, you must get rid of this old thing," I heard one of them say, gesturing to the rocking chair Robert had made for me when David was born. My friend Carol was my rock. "This is insane, Maggie. You have to fight this. The will must be a fake. She must have forced him." But how could I prove it? I was a retired librarian. My savings were modest. I couldn't afford to take on a legal battle against a $17 million fortune. I found a small one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, a place that smelled of stale cigarettes and regret. The movers came, taking my boxes, my life, and leaving me in an empty suite that no longer felt like mine. On the last day, Amelia met me at the door. "I've had the locks changed, of course," she said, her tone businesslike. "For security. I do hope you land on your feet, Margaret." I didn't say a word. I just clutched my purse, which held the only thing I owned from my son's entire estate. The ugly bluebird, wrapped in its tissue paper shroud. For a month, I existed in a fog. I unpacked boxes, but nothing felt right. The apartment was a stranger's house. I'd sit by the window for hours, staring at the brick wall of the building next door, replaying every moment, every warning sign I'd ignored. The grief was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. One night, Drowning in cheap wine and self-pity, I decided to throw the bird away. It sat on my new rickety bookshelf, mocking me, a symbol of my son's betrayal. I snatched it up, my hand shaking with rage and sorrow. It was heavier than I remembered. I stormed to the trash can, ready to smash it to pieces, to finally be rid of the insult. But as I held it over the bin, something stopped me. A memory, faint at first, then sharp and clear. David, at 10 years old, holding the bird up to the light. "It's got a secret, Mum," he had whispered conspiratorially. "It's a treasure keeper." I had dismissed it as a child's fantasy. But now, my heart started to pound. I shook the bird gently. A faint, muffled rattle came from inside. It wasn't just a solid piece of ceramic, it was hollow. With trembling fingers, I took it to the kitchen sink. My hands were clumsy, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't have a hammer. I grabbed a heavy soup can from the cupboard. I wrapped the bird in a dish towel, closed my eyes, and brought the can down hard. The crack was sharp, definitive. I unwrapped the towel. Amidst the shards of bright blue ceramic lay 2 items. A small, old-fashioned brass key, the kind used for a diary or a small lockbox, and a tiny, tightly folded piece of paper yellowed with age. My hands shook so badly I could barely unfold it. It was David's handwriting, but not his usual confident script. This was rushed, tight, almost frantic. The note was short, a dagger to the heart. "Mum, if you're reading this, I messed up. Terribly. I wasn't careful enough. Trust the bird, not the bride. She's not what she seems. The key is for the truth. The truth is in my beginning. I love you. Always. D." Tears streamed down my face, blurring the precious words. It wasn't a betrayal, it was a warning. It was a message from beyond the grave. My son hadn't abandoned me. He had been trying to save me. The anger I had felt toward him transformed into a white-hot rage directed squarely at Amelia. She hadn't just taken his money. She had done something to him. I knew it in my bones. The truth is, in my beginning. What did that mean? Carol came over the next morning, her face a mixture of shock and excitement as I showed her the note. We sat with mugs of coffee, the pieces of the broken bird, and the mysterious key on the table between us. "His beginning," Carol mused, tapping her finger on the table. "His childhood? His first company? His bedroom," I whispered, the realization dawning on me. His childhood bedroom. Not in the Green Hills house, but in the small, 2-story house we'd lived in after Robert died. The house I had sold years ago. That couldn't be it. "No," I said, thinking harder. He recreated his childhood bedroom in the new house, as a study. Amelia hated it. She called it his nostalgia cave. It had his old desk, his bookshelf he built with his grandpa. Oh my God. The bookshelf. When David was 15, he'd gotten into woodworking. He built a bookshelf for his room, and he was so proud of it. He'd insisted on carving his initials, DRC, into the side, and he'd built a secret compartment in it to hide his comic books from me. A simple panel held in place by a wooden peg disguised as a knot in the wood. "The key must be for something in that room," I said, my voice firm with newfound purpose. "I have to get back into that house." The problem was, how? Amelia was there. The locks were changed. I couldn't exactly knock on the door and ask to rummage through her dead husband's study. We spent a week casing my own former home. It was surreal. I felt like a spy sitting in Carol's sensible sedan down the street, watching the comings and goings. We learned Amelia's routine. Yoga at 9, lunch with friends at 1, gallery openings or charity events most evenings. And we noticed something else. A sleek, silver Jaguar was often parked in the driveway overnight. A man started accompanying her to her lunches. A handsome, silver-haired man with a predator's smile. A quick search online using a photo I snapped with my phone revealed his identity. Julian Thorne, a high-profile financial advisor. They weren't even trying to hide it. My son had been dead for less than 3 months. The rage burned hotter. Our break came from the society pages of the local paper. Amelia Dubois Croft was hosting the annual St. Jude's Children's Hospital Benefit Gala at her home. It was the talk of the town. Tickets were $1,000 each. The article mentioned the highlight would be a silent auction held in the grand ballroom and gardens. The entire ground floor and the backyard would be swarming with guests. But David's study, his nostalgia cave, was on the second floor in the east wing. My old wing. The plan was audacious, reckless, and probably illegal, but I didn't care. This was for David. Carol was my getaway driver and lookout. I bought a simple, elegant black dress from a consignment shop and a passable imitation of a designer clutch. The night of the gala, my heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. Carol dropped me off a block away, and I walked toward the house, my house, a stranger about to trespass. Music and laughter spilled out onto the manicured lawn. Valets were parking cars that cost more than my apartment. I slipped in with a wave of guests, handing a fake invitation I'd printed to a harried-looking young woman at the door. She barely glanced at it, ticking a name off her list and waving me through. The house was transformed. Amelia had stripped it of all its warmth, all of our family's history. The walls were stark white, adorned with abstract art that looked like angry paint spills. It was a cold, sterile showcase. I saw her across the room, radiant in a shimmering gold dress, holding court, with Julian Thorne at her side. They were laughing. The sight of it hardened my resolve. I needed an excuse to go upstairs. I found a young catering waiter and put on my most pathetic, confused old lady act. "Oh dear," I said, pressing a hand to my forehead. "All this excitement. Is there a powder room somewhere a bit quieter, away from the hubbub?" He pointed me to a service staircase near the kitchen. "There's a guest bathroom on the second floor, ma'am, just at the top of those stairs." Perfect. My feet were silent on the thick runner of the service stairs. The second floor was quiet, the music from downstairs a muffled thump. I knew this hallway better than the back of my hand. I walked past the master suite, their room, and turned down the corridor to the east wing, to my old home within a home. And there it was. David's study. The door was unlocked. I slipped inside, closing it gently behind me. The air was different in here. It still smelled faintly of old books and the lemon oil he used on the wood. It was the only room Amelia hadn't touched. The old oak desk, the worn leather chair, the photos of his father and me on the wall. And against the far wall, the bookshelf. My hands were shaking as I ran them along the familiar grain of the wood. I found the initials, DRC, and just below them, the disguised peg. It took a moment to work it loose, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. The panel popped open with a soft click. Inside the dark cavity there was no box. My heart sank. Had I been wrong? My fingers probed the darkness, and then they brushed against cold metal. It was a small black fireproof safe, the kind you bolt to the floor, and on the front of it was a small, ornate keyhole. With a trembling hand, I took the brass key from my clutch. It slid into the lock. I turned it. A solid, satisfying thunk echoed in the silent room. I pulled open the heavy door. Inside was a black ledger book and a single silver USB flash drive. I grabbed them, stuffed them into my purse, replaced the panel, and fixed the peg. I was in the room for less than 5 minutes. Getting out was even more nerve-wracking than getting in. I used the main staircase, trying to look like a guest who had simply gotten lost. As I reached the bottom step, I saw Amelia heading my way. My blood ran cold. "I don't believe we've been introduced," she said, her smile as bright and hard as a diamond. Her eyes scanned me, dismissive. "I'm a friend of the Hendersons," I lied, naming a family I knew she despised. "Just admiring your beautiful home. David had such wonderful taste." The mention of his name seemed to please her. "He did, didn't he? Well, do enjoy the auction." She swept past me without a second glance, a queen in her stolen castle. I didn't let myself breathe until I was outside, walking briskly down the block to where Carol was waiting, her engine running. "Did you get it?" she hissed as I scrambled into the car. I just opened my purse, showing her the ledger and the drive. "Let's go." We spent the rest of the night at my kitchen table, a pot of coffee brewing. The ledger was meticulous, written in David's neat, concise hand. It was a shadow account book. It detailed wire transfers, dates, account numbers, and names. It chronicled a systematic embezzlement scheme orchestrated by Julian Thorne, using Amelia as the inside woman. They had been siphoning money from Croft Innovations for over 2 years, funneling it into offshore accounts under a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. The amounts were staggering. Millions. David had clearly started to suspect something was wrong. The entries in the ledger became more detailed, more urgent, in the last few months of his life. He had been building a case against them. The USB drive was the nail in the coffin. It contained copies of emails between Amelia and Julian. They were sickeningly intimate, full of lovers' pet names and declarations of passion. But they also discussed the plan in cold, hard detail. One email from Amelia, dated just 2 weeks before David's death, made me physically ill. "He's getting suspicious, Jay. He's asking Abernathy about changing the will back. We need to accelerate things. The new documents are ready. We just need his signature. I think I can get it done tomorrow after his appointment. Dr. Miller said the new pain medication will make him very compliant. The new will, the one dated 6 months ago. It was a lie. They had drugged him. They had forged his signature or coerced it out of him in a stupor, likely just before he died. And his death, the car accident. Suddenly, it didn't seem like an accident at all. Had they tampered with his car? There was no proof of that on the drive, but the motive was screaming from the pages of the ledger. They didn't just rob my son. They killed him. The next morning, I didn't call a seasoned, expensive lawyer. I called a young man my friend Carol knew from her church. His name was Daniel Peterson. He was young, hungry, and his small office was located above a bakery. He looked barely out of law school, but he had a fire in his eyes. He listened to my entire story without interruption, his expression shifting from skepticism to intrigue to righteous anger. When I finished, I pushed the ledger and the USB drive across his desk. He plugged the drive into his laptop. For 20 minutes, the only sounds were the clicking of his keyboard and my own ragged breathing. Finally, he looked up, his face pale. "Mrs. Croft," he said, his voice low and steady. This is explosive. This isn't just a civil case to contest a will. This is grand larceny, fraud, conspiracy, and possibly more." "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "We don't go to the police, not yet," he said, already thinking strategically. "They'll spook. They'll move the money, destroy any other evidence. We need to be smarter. We need to trap them." Daniel Peterson was brilliant. He brought in a forensic accountant, a grizzled old man who took one look at the ledger and whistled. "This kid, your son, he did all the work for us. This is a perfect roadmap to financial ruin." Our plan was surgical. We wouldn't go after the whole 17 million at once. We'd go after the Shell Corporation. Daniel filed an emergency injunction with a federal judge, using the evidence from the USB drive to prove probable cause of criminal activity. The injunction was granted, freezing all assets connected to the Cayman Islands account, an account that held over $8 million of stolen money. We did it silently, electronically. Amelia and Julian would have no idea until they tried to access the funds. And then we waited. The karma, when it came, was harder and faster than I could have ever imagined. It happened 2 weeks later. Amelia was hosting another one of her ostentatious parties, this one a poolside champagne brunch. Daniel had arranged for a contact in the financial crimes unit to be ready. The tip-off came from the forensic accountant. There was a flurry of panicked activity on the frozen accounts. Someone was desperately trying to move the money. Julian was trying to liquidate his assets. The trap had been sprung. I wasn't there, but Daniel told me everything. He went to the party himself, dressed in a crisp linen suit, posing as a new investor in town. He said the scene was one of obscene opulence. Women in flowing dresses, men in expensive shirts, champagne flowing like water. Amelia was the center of it all, laughing, shimmering in the sun. At precisely 2:15 p.m., as dessert was being served, 2 plain-clothes detectives walked calmly through the side gate and approached Julian Thorne. They spoke to him quietly. The color drained from his face. One of the detectives cuffed him. The party chatter died down. Everyone was staring. Amelia, seeing her lover being arrested, rushed over. "What is the meaning of this? Do you know who he is?" she demanded, her voice high and shrill. "Yes, ma'am, we do," the lead detective said calmly. "Mr. Thorne is under arrest for wire fraud and conspiracy." He then turned to Amelia. "Amelia Dubois Croft, we have a warrant to search these premises, and you are under arrest for the same." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Amelia looked like she had been turned to stone. Her perfect mask of sophistication shattered, revealing the ugly, greedy creature beneath. "This is a mistake!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You can't do this!" And that's when Daniel Peterson made his move. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "It's no mistake, Amelia," he said. He looked around at the assembled guests. This woman, with her accomplice, systematically defrauded her late husband, David Croft, of millions of dollars. They forged a will to steal his estate from his grieving mother, leaving her with nothing. He paused, letting the words sink in. David knew. He left behind the evidence. He knew what you were. Amelia stared at him, her beautiful face contorted in a mask of pure hatred. Then her eyes darted around the crowd, at the faces of her new friends, all staring at her with shock and revulsion. Her social standing, the thing she had coveted more than anything, was evaporating before her very eyes. She didn't just lose the money. She lost her audience. It all came out in the trial. The emails, the ledger, the forensic accountant's testimony. They found evidence that Amelia had been crushing painkillers into David's food and drink for weeks, keeping him in a pliable, confused state. The new will was proven to be a forgery. The car accident was reinvestigated. While they could never definitively prove foul play, the brakes on David's car had been serviced by a new mechanic recommended by Julian Thorne just 3 days before the crash. The mechanic had since disappeared. While they weren't charged with murder, everyone in that courtroom knew the truth. Amelia and Julian were found guilty on all financial counts. They were sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. The fraudulent will was nullified. The estate, what was left of it, after legal fees and recovering the stolen funds, reverted to me. The house, the money, all of it. The first thing I did when I moved back into the house was tear out all of Amelia's cold white renovations. I filled the rooms with warmth and colour again. I put David's pictures back on the walls. I sat in Robert's rocking chair. I'm sitting in it now. in the sunroom, looking out at the garden. The house is quiet. It's still too big for one old woman. But it's not empty. It's filled with the memory of my son's love. The money, the $17 million, doesn't mean much to me. I've set up a foundation in David's name to fund scholarships for young software engineers. It's what he would have wanted. People call it a story of karma, of revenge, and perhaps it is. But for me, it's a story about a mother's love and a son's love that was strong enough to reach back from the grave. Amelia inherited a house and a fortune, but in the end, that's all it was. Cold assets. I only inherited a cheap, ugly ceramic bluebird, but inside it, I inherited the truth. I inherited justice for my son. I inherited the final, undeniable proof that he had never, not for 1 second, stopped loving me. And that is an inheritance beyond any price. It is the only one that ever truly mattered.